The marble floors of the Whitmore Financial Tower gleamed under the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 23 floors of premium office space, each one representing years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and dreams that most people called impossible. Standing in the lobby that Thursday afternoon, watching my own brother's face twist with disgust as he looked around, I never imagined I'd be the one making the call to have him removed from the building I owned. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning started like any other. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office on the 23rd floor when my assistant, Rebecca Martinez, knocked on the door. Her usually composed expression carried a hint of uncertainty that immediately caught my attention. "Elise, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your brother, but he doesn't have an appointment and he's being quiet," insistent with the front desk staff. My stomach dropped. Marcus. It had been almost 3 years since we'd spoken, not since our father's funeral, when he'd made his feelings about my success crystal clear. The last thing he'd said to me was that I'd forgotten where I came from, that money had changed me into someone he didn't recognize. "Send him up," I said, closing the financial reports. Rebecca hesitated for a moment, clearly picking up on something in my tone, but nodded and left. I spent the next few minutes staring out at the Seattle skyline, trying to prepare myself for whatever Marcus had come to say. The city sprawled below me, a testament to everything I'd built since leaving our small hometown of Cedar Falls 15 years ago. Back then, I was just Elise Parker, the girl whose family ran the only hardware store on Main Street. Now I am Elise Parker, CEO of Parker & Associates Investment Group, owner of 3 commercial properties, and employer of over 200 people. The knock on my door came sooner than expected. Marcus walked in without waiting for permission, and I was struck by how different he looked. The brother I remembered was always impeccably dressed, even when we were kids. He took pride in his appearance, in presenting himself well to the world. The man standing in my office wore a wrinkled flannel shirt, jeans with holes that weren't fashionable, and boots that had seen better days. His hair, once perfectly styled, hung limp and unkempt. "Nice place you got here, sis," he said, but there was no warmth in his voice. His eyes swept around my office, taking in the mahogany desk, the awards on the walls, the expensive artwork I'd carefully selected. "Must be nice to live in your ivory tower while the rest of us deal with real problems." "Hello, Marcus," I said, standing up from behind my desk. "It's been a while." "Yeah, it has. Funny how you never seem to have time to visit home anymore. Too busy counting your money, I guess." I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same one I'd carried through childhood whenever Marcus was in one of his moods. Even as kids, he had a way of making me feel small, like my achievements didn't matter, like I was somehow betraying our family by wanting more than Cedar Falls could offer. "I've been busy, yes. Building a business takes time and dedication, but you could have called. You could have—" "Called?" Marcus laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. "Called to what? Listen to you talk about your big important deals while Mom struggles to keep the hardware store afloat, while I'm working 2 jobs just to keep my head above water?" I hadn't known about Mom's struggles with the store. She'd never mentioned it in our brief phone calls, always insisting everything was fine, that I shouldn't worry about things back home. The guilt hit me immediately, followed quickly by defensive anger. If Mom needed help, she should have said something. I would have. What? Written her a check? Thrown some money at the problem and felt better about yourself? Marcus moved closer to my desk, his hands clenched at his sides. "That's your solution to everything now, isn't it? Money fixes everything in your world. That's not fair, and you know it." "Fair?" His voice rose, and I glanced nervously toward the door, hoping Rebecca couldn't hear this conversation. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about how you promised Dad you'd help keep the family business going, and then you disappeared to chase your big city dreams. Let's talk about how you've missed every family gathering for the past 5 years because you're too important now." The accusations stung because they held fragments of truth, but they ignored the full picture. I'd left Cedar Falls because staying would have meant accepting a life that felt too small, too limiting. I'd worked 16-hour days for years, lived in a studio apartment barely bigger than a closet, survived on ramen noodles and determination. Every dollar I'd earned, Every client I'd won, every property I'd acquired, had come through my own effort and sacrifice. "I never promised Dad I'd run the hardware store," I said quietly. "That was always your plan, Marcus. You were the one who wanted to take over the family business." And I did take it over, until the big box stores moved in and we couldn't compete anymore. Until I had to sell it to pay Dad's medical bills because his insurance wouldn't cover everything. Marcus's voice cracked slightly, and for a moment I saw past his anger to the pain underneath. "Do you even know what it's like to watch everything your family built just disappear?" I wanted to reach out to him to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but his next words stopped me cold. "But I guess that doesn't matter to you now. You've got your fancy building, your expensive suits, your important friends. You've made it clear you don't belong with people like us anymore." "People like us?" I repeated, feeling my own anger beginning to rise. "Marcus, I am a person like us. I grew up in the same house, went to the same schools, helped Dad in the store every summer until I left for college. Just because I've been successful doesn't mean I've forgotten where I came from." "Successful," he scoffed. "Is that what you call it? You've turned into everything we used to make fun of when we were kids. Remember Mr. Henderson from the bank? How we used to laugh at his fancy car and his condescending attitude toward everyone in town? Congratulations, Elise. You've become Mr. Henderson." That comparison hit harder than anything else he could have said. Mr. Henderson had been the epitome of everything we disliked about people with money and power in our small town. He'd looked down on families like ours, treated my parents like they were beneath him whenever they'd needed to discuss the store's finances. "I am nothing like Henderson," I said firmly. "I employ over 200 people. I've helped dozens of small businesses get the funding they needed to grow. I've donated more money to charities in the past year than Henderson probably made in a decade." "Oh, you donate money? How noble of you. Tell me, sis, when's the last time you actually got your hands dirty helping someone? When's the last time you spent time with people who can't do anything for your business?" Marcus moved toward the window, looking down at the street below with obvious disdain. "Look at this place. Look at all this wealth and privilege. This isn't you, Elise. This is some character you're playing, some mask you put on to fit into this world. But I know who you really are underneath all this." "And who is that, Marcus?" He turned back to face me, and the look in his eyes was cold and calculating. "You're still the scared little girl who was never good enough, who always had to prove herself by being better than everyone else. The only difference is now you have money to hide behind." The words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded, but they also sparked something else in me. A realization that this conversation wasn't really about the family business or our father's medical bills, or even about the distance between us. This was about Marcus's own failures, his own disappointments, and his need to blame someone else for the way his life had turned out. "You know what, Marcus? You're right about one thing. I have changed. I've grown. I've learned. I've built something meaningful with my life, instead of sitting around blaming other people for my problems." His face flushed red. "There it is. There's the real Elise Parker, looking down on the little people from your tower. You think you're better than me, better than our family, better than everyone who doesn't have your money and success. I don't think I'm better than anyone. But I also don't think success is something to be ashamed of or apologize for." "Success," he repeated mockingly, "built on what? Stepping on people like us? Forgetting where you came from? Abandoning your family when they needed you most?" The accusation of abandoning the family was the final straw. I'd sent money home when Dad was sick. I'd called regularly. I'd tried to maintain relationships despite the geographical distance and the demands of building my business. The fact that it hadn't been enough for Marcus, that nothing would ever be enough for him, suddenly became crystal clear. "I think this conversation is over," I said, moving toward my office door. But Marcus wasn't finished. As I reached for the door handle, he grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop me. "You don't get to dismiss me, Elise. Not when I'm telling you the truth about what you've become." The moment Marcus's hand closed around my arm, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. His grip wasn't painful, but it was possessive, controlling the same way he used to grab my toys when we were children, and he decided I'd had them long enough. "Let go of me, Marcus," I said quietly, but he didn't release his hold. You're going to listen to what I have to say, whether you want to or not. I didn't drive 8 hours to Seattle just to have you walk away from me like I'm some inconvenience. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. There was desperation there now, mixing with the anger in a way that made me uncomfortable. This wasn't just about money or family obligations anymore. Something deeper was driving this confrontation. Fine, talk, but take your hand off me first. He hesitated for a moment, then released his grip. I rubbed my arm where his fingers had been, not because it hurt, but because the gesture felt like a boundary I needed to reestablish. You want to know why I'm really here, Ellis? It's not just about Mom's store or Dad's medical bills. It's about Tommy. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. My nephew. Marcus's 8-year-old son, the kid I'd barely seen since my brother's divorce 3 years ago. The mention of his name immediately changed my defensive posture. Whatever issues I had with Marcus, Tommy was innocent in all of this. What about Tommy? Is he okay? He's sick, Elise, really sick. Leukemia. The word hung in the air between us like a physical presence. We caught it early, the doctors say, but the treatment. God, the treatment costs are going to bankrupt me. Insurance covers some of it, but not nearly enough. Not the experimental therapy that could give him the best chance. The office suddenly felt too small, too warm. I moved away from Marcus, toward the window, trying to process what he'd just told me. My nephew, the little boy who used to send me crayon drawings in the mail, who called me Aunt Ellie in his sweet high voice, was fighting for his life. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't anyone call me? Because we knew what you'd do. You'd swoop in with your checkbook and try to fix everything with money. And then you'd disappear again. Tommy doesn't need a rich aunt who shows up once to play hero. He needs a family, real family. The accusations stung, but I pushed past it. What do the doctors say? What's his prognosis? Which hospital is he at? Seattle Children's, actually. That's part of why I'm here. We moved up here 2 months ago so he could be closer to his treatment team. We're staying in some crappy motel near the hospital because it's all I can afford, and every day I watch my son get sicker while I try to figure out how to pay for the treatment that could save his life. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been working in my corner office, making deals and growing my wealth, my brother and nephew had been struggling just miles away, and I'd had no idea. I want to help Marcus. Of course I want to help. Why is that so wrong? Because help and control aren't the same thing, but you've never learned the difference. Marcus began pacing in front of my desk, his agitation growing with each step. You think money solves everything, that you can just write a check and make all the problems go away. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes it does, though. Sometimes money is exactly what solves the problem. Tommy needs treatment, treatment costs money, I have money. It's not that complicated. See? There it is again. You reduce everything to dollars and cents, like human relationships are just another business transaction. He stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. Do you know what Tommy asked me last week? I shook my head. He asked me why his rich aunt doesn't love him enough to visit him in the hospital. An 8-year-old kid, Elise, dying of cancer, and he thinks you don't love him because you haven't been there. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into one of the chairs near my conference table, feeling the weight of everything I'd missed, everything I'd prioritized over family. I didn't know he was sick. I didn't know you were even in Seattle. How was I supposed to visit him if no one told me? We shouldn't have had to tell you. You should have been part of our lives enough to know these things already. Marcus's voice softened slightly, but the accusation remained. When's the last time you called Mom just to check in? Not because it was her birthday or Christmas, but just to see how she was doing. I tried to remember, but the honest answer was embarrassing. Months. It had been months since I'd called home without a specific reason. I've been building something important here, Marcus. This company employs hundreds of people. The decisions I make affect their livelihoods, their families' futures. I can't just drop everything every time. Every time what? Every time your family needs you? His voice rose again, and I worried that people in adjacent offices might hear. You know what your problem is, Elise? You've convinced yourself that what you do here is more important than the people who love you. You've made your business your god and you worship it every day in this temple you've built." He gestured around my office with obvious disgust. "Look at this place. Look at all this stuff. These awards, this furniture, these expensive decorations. What does any of it mean if you don't have people to share it with? What's the point of having all this success if you're too busy maintaining it to actually live?" I wanted to argue with him, to defend the choices I'd made and the sacrifices that had been necessary to build my company. But something about the way he looked at my office made me see it differently for a moment. The awards that had once felt like validation now seemed like trophies in a game no one else was playing. The expensive artwork that had impressed clients suddenly felt cold and impersonal. "You think I don't know what I've given up?" I asked quietly. "You think these choices were easy for me? I think you've gotten so comfortable with your choices that you've forgotten they were choices at all. You act like success just happened to you, like you had no control over the path that led you here." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "But you did have control, Elise. Every missed Christmas, every ignored phone call, every time you chose work over family. Those were choices. And every 16-hour day, every rejected loan application I had to overcome, every client meeting where I had to prove I belonged in the room because I was young and female and from a small town. Those were necessities, not choices. You have no idea what it took to build this." "You're right, I don't know what it took, but I know what it costs, and so do you." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. It was Tommy, lying in a hospital bed, thin and pale, but smiling at the camera. "This is what it cost, Elise. This is what you missed while you were building your empire." Looking at that picture of my nephew, seeing how small and fragile he looked surrounded by medical equipment, something cracked open inside my chest. The defensive walls I'd built around my choices, around my priorities, suddenly felt flimsy and inadequate. "I want to see him," I said suddenly. "I want to go to the hospital right now and see Tommy." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether I was serious. "It's not visiting hours." "Then we'll wait until visiting hours. Or I'll call the hospital and arrange something. I know people there. The company has donated to their children's wing several times." "Of course you do. Of course you know people. Of course you can arrange special treatment because you're important and wealthy." But despite his sarcastic tone, I could see something else in his expression. Hope, maybe. Or relief. Does it matter how I arrange it if it means Tommy gets to see his aunt? For the first time since he'd walked into my office, Marcus seemed uncertain. The anger that had been driving his words was still there, but it was competing with something else now. The desperate love of a father who would do anything to save his child, even if it meant accepting help from the sister he'd been trying to reject. "He asks about you sometimes," he admitted quietly. "Even after everything, even after years of not seeing you, he still talks about his Aunt Ellie. He remembers the toys you used to send for his birthday, the postcards from your business trips. He keeps them in a shoebox under his bed." The image of my nephew treasuring those small gestures, holding on to them while I'd moved on to bigger deals and more important meetings, was almost too much to bear. The silence stretched between us for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Marcus stood there holding his phone, Tommy's picture still glowing on the screen, while I tried to reconcile the image of my sick nephew with the successful businesswoman I'd worked so hard to become. "There's something else," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something I haven't told you yet." I braced myself for another revelation, another layer of family crisis I'd been oblivious to while focused on quarterly earnings and acquisition targets. "Tommy's been asking to see your building. He knows you own it," Mom told him during one of our phone calls home. "He's fascinated by the idea that his aunt owns a whole skyscraper." Marcus's expression softened as he spoke about his son. "Last week, when the doctors told him he'd need another round of chemo, you know what he said? He said he wanted to be strong like Aunt Ellie, who built a building so tall it touches the clouds." The words hit me harder than any of Marcus's earlier accusations. Here I'd been thinking my success had driven a wedge between me and my family, when in reality, at least for Tommy, it had become something aspirational, something to admire. "He wants to see the building?" "He talks about it constantly. The nurses know all about his Aunt Ellie and her tower that touches the sky." It's become this symbol of strength for him, this proof that people from our family can do impossible things. Marcus's voice caught slightly. The night before his first surgery, he made me promise that if he got better, we'd come see your building together. I felt tears threatening for the first time since Marcus had walked into my office. The image of my 8-year-old nephew finding strength in my achievements, using them as motivation to fight his illness, completely reframed everything I thought I knew about the cost of my success. Why didn't you lead with this, Marcus? Why start with all the anger and accusations when you knew this would matter to me? His face hardened again, the momentary vulnerability disappearing behind familiar walls of resentment. Because I needed you to understand what your absence has cost first. I needed you to feel what we've been feeling all these years. And what exactly have you been feeling? Abandoned, forgotten, like we weren't good enough for your new life. Marcus began pacing again. But his movements were less agitated now, more thoughtful. Do you remember when you first made your first million? You called home so excited, talking about expansion plans and new opportunities. You know what Mom said after she hung up? I shook my head. She said I'm proud of her, but I miss her. That was 5 years ago, Elise. 5 years of Mom missing her daughter, who was too busy celebrating success to come home and share it with the people who raised her. The guilt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Frustration at the impossible position I'd been put in. So what was I supposed to do, Marcus? Apologize for succeeding? Feel guilty about building something meaningful with my life? You were supposed to remember that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. He stopped pacing and leaned against my conference table. You were supposed to find a way to grow without growing away from us. That's easy to say, but you have no idea what it's actually like to build something from nothing in this world. Every day was a choice between moving forward or falling behind. Every relationship, every social event, every family gathering was time away from the work that would determine whether my company survived or failed. And now? Has your company survived? Are you safe now? Can you finally afford to be human again? The questions cut deep because they highlighted something I'd been avoiding for months. Yes, Parker & Associates was successful. Yes, I was financially secure beyond anything I'd dreamed of as a child. But somehow, the drive to keep growing, to keep achieving, had become so ingrained that I couldn't remember how to stop, how to shift from survival mode to actually living. It's not that simple, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they sounded hollow. Isn't it? You own this building, Elise. You employ hundreds of people. You've got more money than you could spend in a lifetime. What exactly are you still fighting for? Before I could answer, my office door opened and Rebecca walked in carrying a stack of documents. She stopped short when she saw Marcus, clearly sensing the tension in the room. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Henderson Industries contract needs your signature before 5 o'clock. And the Seattle Times reporter is here for your 4:30 interview about the downtown development project. The mention of my schedule, the reminder of all the commitments and responsibilities waiting for my attention, made something snap inside me. Here I was, learning that my nephew was fighting for his life just miles away, confronting the reality of how isolated I'd become from the people who mattered most, and I still had reporters to meet and contracts to sign. Cancel the interview, I said without hesitation. Reschedule it for next week. Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly. In the 5 years she'd worked for me, I'd never canceled a scheduled interview. Are you sure? The reporter came all the way from downtown, and this article could be really good for the company's profile. I'm sure. Cancel it. Marcus watched this exchange with obvious interest, as if my decision to prioritize our conversation over a business commitment was some kind of test I'd just passed. And the Henderson contract? Rebecca asked. I looked at the documents in her hands, then at Marcus, then back at Rebecca. Leave them on my desk. I'll deal with them later. After Rebecca left, closing the door behind her, Marcus studied my face carefully. That was new. What do you mean? 5 years ago, when Dad was in the hospital, you took business calls during visiting hours. You left his bedside to sign some urgent contract. Today, you canceled a conversation with me. He paused. Either you're putting on a show, or something's actually changed. The memory he referenced was painful because it was accurate. I had taken calls during Dad's final days. Had convinced myself that maintaining business momentum was the responsible thing to do. That Dad would want me to keep building the future he'd encouraged me to pursue. Maybe something has changed. Maybe watching you hold that picture of Tommy made me realize that all the contracts and interviews in the world won't matter if I lose everyone I care about. Pretty words, Alice. But I've heard pretty words from you before. The question is, what are you actually going to do differently? It was a fair challenge. How many times had I promised to visit home more often, to call more regularly, to find better balance between work and family? How many times had good intentions been overwhelmed by the next crisis, the next opportunity, the next urgent priority? I want to meet with Tommy's doctors. I want to understand his treatment plan, his prognosis, what resources he needs, and I want to do it as his aunt, not as a potential donor. That's a start. What else? I want you and Tommy to stay in my guest apartment instead of that motel. The building has residential units on the top floor. I keep one for out-of-town clients, but it's empty right now. Marcus looked skeptical. We can't afford. I'm not charging you rent, Marcus. I'm offering my nephew a comfortable place to recover between treatments. There's a difference. Is there? Or is this just another way for you to throw money at a problem until it goes away? The accusation hurt because part of it was probably true. Money had become my default solution to most problems, partly because it was effective, but partly because it was easier than the messy emotional work of actually being present for people. Maybe it is, but right now your son is sleeping in a motel room while fighting cancer, and I have a luxury apartment sitting empty 23 floors above us. If you want to call that throwing money at the problem, fine, but Tommy deserves better than a motel room, and you know it. For the first time since he'd arrived, Marcus looked uncertain about his anger. The practical father in him was clearly warring with the resentful brother, who wanted to reject anything that felt like charity. There would be conditions, he said finally, such as, you don't get to swoop in and take over Tommy's treatment. You don't get to override his doctors or demand special treatment because you're wealthy. And you don't get to use this as an excuse to feel like you fixed everything and can go back to ignoring us. I nodded slowly. Those seem like reasonable conditions. Do you have any others? Yeah, one more. Marcus's expression grew serious again. You have to actually spend time with him. Not just write checks or make phone calls to arrange things. You have to show up, be present, let him get to know his Aunt Ellie as a person, not just as a success story. The request seemed simple, but I knew it wasn't. Spending time with Tommy would mean adjusting my schedule, potentially missing meetings, saying no to opportunities that might not come again. It would mean choosing family over business in ways that went against every instinct I'd developed over the past decade. But looking at Marcus's face, seeing the desperation beneath his anger, thinking about my nephew fighting for his life while I worried about quarterly reports, the choice suddenly felt inevitable. Okay, I said, I'll do it, all of it. Marcus stared at me for a long moment after I agreed to his conditions, as if waiting for me to add qualifiers or exceptions that would prove I wasn't serious. When I remained silent, something shifted in his posture. The rigid defensiveness that had defined his presence since walking into my office began to soften, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. You mean it? You'll actually make time for him? I mean it. The certainty in my own voice surprised me. When can we go see him? I know visiting hours are limited, but I'd like to meet with his medical team first, if possible. His oncologist is Dr. Sarah Chen. She's been incredible, really takes time to explain everything, treats Tommy like he's her own kid. Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time scrolling through contacts rather than photos. I could call her office, see if she has time to meet with us today. The word us caught my attention. Despite everything he'd said about my wealth and privilege, despite his accusations about my priorities, Marcus was automatically including me in the medical discussions. It was the first sign that underneath his anger, he genuinely wanted me to be part of Tommy's life. Before you call, I said, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. Marcus looked wary again. What? How bad is it really? The financial situation, I mean. You mentioned insurance not covering everything, but what are we actually talking about here? Why does it matter? You're gonna offer to pay for everything anyway. It matters because I want to understand what you've been carrying alone. It matters because Tommy is my nephew and I should have known how bad things were. And it matters because if I'm going to help, I want to do it right. Marcus sat down in one of my conference chairs, suddenly looking exhausted. The fight seemed to go out of him all at once, leaving behind a father who'd been shouldering an impossible burden for months. The basic treatment is covered, mostly, but the experimental therapy that could give him the best chance, that's not covered at all. It's a clinical trial, but even with the trial, there are costs. Travel expenses when we had to come up here, the motel, food, missed work. He rubbed his face with both hands. I've been working construction during the day and driving for a rideshare company at night. But it's not enough. I'm behind on rent back home, behind on my truck payment, and I've maxed out every credit card I have. The picture he painted was devastating. While I'd been worrying about market fluctuations and competitor analysis, my brother had been working himself to exhaustion, trying to save his son. What about Mom? Is she helping? She's trying, but the hardware store barely breaks even on a good month. She sold her wedding ring last month to help with Tommy's medication costs. Marcus's voice broke slightly on the last part. Our mother sold her wedding ring, Elise, the one Dad saved for months to buy her when they got engaged. The image of our mother parting with something so precious, so loaded with memories and meaning, to help pay for her grandson's cancer treatment, was almost unbearable. I thought about the jewelry in my own collection, pieces worth more than most people made in a year, sitting in a safe, because I rarely had time to wear them. We're going to fix this, I said firmly. All of it. The treatment costs, the debts, everything. There you go again, Marcus said, but his tone lacked the earlier venom. You think money fixes everything? In this case, it literally does. Tommy needs treatment. Treatment costs money. I have money. Your truck payment, Mom's financial struggles. These are problems that money actually can solve. I leaned forward in my chair. I know that sounds simplistic, but sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. And what happens after? When Tommy's better? When the bills are paid? When the crisis is over? Do you disappear again until the next emergency? It was the question I'd been dreading because I didn't have a good answer. My track record spoke for itself. I showed up during crises, wrote checks, made promises to stay more connected, and then gradually slipped back into old patterns as work demands increased. I don't know, I admitted. I honestly don't know how to balance everything I've built here with being the kind of family member you need me to be. But I know I want to try. Wanting to try isn't enough anymore, Elise. Tommy's 8 years old. He needs consistency, not good intentions that fall apart when you get busy. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message, then another, and another. I glanced at the screen and saw notifications about the canceled interview, questions about the Henderson contract, reminders about tomorrow's board meeting. The constant demands of my business life, pulling at my attention even during the most important conversation I'd had in years. Marcus noticed me looking at my phone. See? It's already starting. You can't even have one conversation about your nephew without getting distracted by work. You're right. I picked up my phone and did something I'd never done before. I turned it completely off. Not on silent, not on vibrate, but completely powered down. There. No more distractions. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. You just turned off your phone, in the middle of a business day. The world won't end because I'm unreachable for a few hours. Even as I said it, I felt a familiar anxiety creeping in. What if there was an emergency? What if a client needed an immediate response? What if I missed something crucial? But then I thought about Tommy, lying in a hospital bed, wondering why his successful aunt had never come to visit. I thought about my mother selling her wedding ring while I wore designer clothes to business dinners. The anxiety about missed calls suddenly seemed absurd. I want to understand something, I said. Earlier, you said I don't belong with people like us anymore. But then you told me about Tommy looking up to my success, using it as motivation to fight his illness. Which is it? Am I an inspiration to him, or am I the enemy? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Both, I guess. He's proud of what you've accomplished, but he also misses having you in his life. Kids don't understand why success has to mean separation. Maybe it doesn't have to. What do you mean? I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city I'd conquered. the skyline that represented everything I'd achieved. Maybe the problem isn't that I became successful. Maybe the problem is that I thought success meant leaving everything else behind. Explain. When I left Cedar Falls, I was so focused on proving I could make it in the big city that I convinced myself I had to choose between my old life and my new one. Every time I came home, I felt like I was moving backward. Every family gathering felt like time away from building my future. I turned back to face Marcus. But what if that was wrong? What if success is only meaningful when you share it with people you love? Pretty theory, but how does it work in practice? You've got a company to run, hundreds of employees depending on you, deals that can't wait. Then maybe I need to learn how to delegate better. Maybe I need to trust other people to handle things that don't absolutely require my personal attention. The idea felt revolutionary and terrifying at the same time. I have an entire executive team that I hired specifically because they're capable of running this company. Maybe it's time I actually let them do it. Marcus studied my face carefully. You're talking about making some pretty big changes. Yeah, I am. Because the alternative is losing everyone who matters to me while I chase achievements that only matter if I have people to share them with. And if your company suffers, if delegating more responsibility means losing some control, maybe missing some opportunities. I thought about Tommy's picture on Marcus's phone, about my mother's wedding ring sitting in some pawn shop, about all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments I'd missed while building my empire of glass and steel. Then I guess I'll learn to live with smaller profits and more meaningful relationships. For the first time since he'd walked into my office, Marcus smiled. It was small and cautious, but it was genuine. Tommy's going to want to meet you as soon as possible, he said. Fair warning. He's going to have about 1 million questions about this building and how you built your company. The kid wants to be an entrepreneur when he grows up. When he grows up, I repeated, struck by the simple confidence in Marcus's words. Not if, but when. He's going to beat this, isn't he? He has to. Marcus's voice was fierce with determination. He's got too much life to live, too many dreams to chase, including seeing his Aunt Ellie's building that touches the clouds. I looked around my office one more time, seeing it through new eyes. The awards and expensive furniture that had once seemed like proof of my worth now looked like museum pieces. Impressive, but cold. What would Tommy think when he saw this place? Would he be inspired by the success it represented? Or would he wonder why his aunt needed so much space just for herself? We should go see him now, I said suddenly. I don't want to wait until visiting hours or until we've arranged a meeting with his doctor. I want to see my nephew. Marcus checked his watch. It's almost 3. The afternoon visiting period starts in about an hour. Then let's go wait in the lobby. Let's go there when visiting hours start, instead of rushing in at the last minute because I had something more important to do. You're sure? No emergency calls to make? No urgent emails to send? I gestured toward my powered-off phone. Nothing's more urgent than this. The drive to Seattle Children's Hospital took 23 minutes through downtown traffic, but it felt both eternal and too short. Marcus had insisted on driving his beat-up pickup truck rather than taking my Tesla, claiming he didn't want to arrive at the hospital looking like we were, quote, 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 quote. I didn't argue. The truck's worn seats and rattling engine seemed more honest somehow, more appropriate for visiting a sick child than my polished luxury vehicle. He might look different than you remember, Marcus said as we sat at a red light 3 blocks from the hospital. The chemo has made him lose weight, and his hair is mostly gone now. But his spirit? That's still all Tommy. I tried to prepare myself for seeing my nephew transformed by illness, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I remembered him clearly enough to notice the difference. The last time I'd seen Tommy in person was at Dad's funeral 3 years ago, when he was only 5. My most recent mental image of him came from Christmas photos Mom had texted me, and even those were months old. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so absent from Tommy's life that cancer might not be the only thing that had changed about him. He'd grown from a toddler to a little boy to a young kid fighting a life-threatening illness, and I'd missed all of it. Does he really remember me? I asked quietly. Are you kidding? You're legendary in his mind. Aunt Ellie, who builds buildings and flies in airplanes for work. He's got this whole fantasy about you living in a penthouse office where you make important phone calls and tell people what to do. Marcus's tone was gentle, almost affectionate. He doesn't understand why adults make things so complicated. In his world, if you love someone, you show up. If you miss someone, you visit them. Simple. The parking garage at Children's Hospital was nearly full, forcing us to drive up to the 4th level before finding a space. As we walked toward the elevators, I noticed Marcus checking his appearance in the reflective surface of a car window, straightening his shirt and running his hands through his hair. It struck me that this visit meant as much to him as it did to me. Maybe more. He'd been Tommy's sole advocate and caregiver for months, and bringing me into the picture represented either reinforcement or potential interference. The elevator ride down was silent, but as the doors opened onto the hospital's main floor, Marcus turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Before we go up there, I need to say something." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've been angry at you for a long time, and a lot of that anger was justified. But some of it was just easier than admitting how scared I am. Bringing you here, letting you meet with his doctors, accepting your help, it feels like admitting I can't handle this alone. Marcus, nobody should have to handle this alone. I know that. In my head, I know that. But accepting help has never been easy for our family. We were raised to be self-sufficient, to handle our own problems." He looked around the hospital lobby, with its cheerful murals and volunteer information desk, trying to make a cheerful environment out of an inherently sad place. "Pride is a luxury I can't afford anymore, though. Not when it's Tommy's life on the line." We checked in at the oncology ward's reception desk, where a nurse named Jennifer greeted Marcus by name and asked how Tommy had been feeling since his last treatment. It was clear that Marcus had become a familiar presence here, part of the extended community of families fighting childhood cancer. The casual way Jennifer spoke to him, the concerned but optimistic tone she used, suggested that Tommy was well-liked by the staff. "He's been asking about his Aunt Ellie all morning," Jennifer told us with a smile. "Dr. Chen mentioned that she might be meeting with both of you later. Tommy's very excited." As we walked down the hallway toward Tommy's room, I noticed details that I'd never paid attention to during my brief visits to hospitals for board meetings or donation ceremonies. The way parents slept in uncomfortable chairs beside their children's beds. The elaborate charts tracking medication schedules and treatment protocols. The small personal items, stuffed animals, drawings, family photos, that families use to make sterile medical environments feel more like home. Room 314 had Tommy's name written on a dry erase board outside the door, along with the names of his primary nurses, and a cheerful drawing of a rainbow that someone had added in colorful markers. Marcus knocked gently before opening the door. "Hey, buddy, I brought someone special to see you." The little boy in the hospital bed looked up from a handheld video game, and despite Marcus's warnings, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Tommy was tiny, far smaller than I'd expected for an 8-year-old, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. A colorful knit cap covered his head, and various medical devices surrounded his bed. But when he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that transformed everything about his appearance. "Aunt Ellie, you came! Dad said you might come, but I didn't know if you were too busy with your important work." His voice was weak but animated, filled with genuine excitement that made my chest tight with emotion. "I'm never too busy for you, Tommy. I'm sorry it took me so long to visit." He set aside his video game and studied my face with the intense focus that children bring to important moments. "You look different than in pictures, taller, and your hair is different." I sat down in the chair beside his bed, trying to match his serious tone. "You look different too, very grown up." "The doctors say I'm brave, braver than lots of kids they know." Tommy's pride in this assessment was obvious. "Are you brave too? Dad says you have to be brave to build really tall buildings." "Sometimes I think I am, but I think you're much braver than me." "Why?" "Because fighting sickness is harder than building buildings. Buildings stay put once you build them, but getting better takes courage every single day." Tommy considered this seriously. "Do you want to see my drawings? I drew your building. Well, I drew what I think it looks like. Dad says it's really tall and has lots of windows." He reached for a folder on his bedside table, and I helped him open it to reveal dozens of drawings. Most were typical 8-year-old artwork, stick figures and simple houses. But several showed elaborate skyscrapers with countless windows and what appeared to be clouds surrounding the upper floors. "This one is my favorite," he said, pointing to a drawing that showed a stick figure with long hair standing on top of a very tall building. "That's you on the roof of your building, watching over the whole city like a superhero." The image was so innocent and optimistic that I had to blink back tears. In Tommy's imagination, my success wasn't about money or power. It was about being strong enough to protect people, tall enough to see everything that needed watching over. "Can I tell you a secret, Tommy?" He nodded eagerly. "Sometimes I feel lonely up in that tall building. It's beautiful, and I can see the whole city, but there aren't many people up there with me. Why don't you invite people to come up, like me and Dad and Grandma? We could have a party on the roof." The simplicity of his solution, the assumption that loneliness was just a problem that hadn't been properly addressed yet, was both heartbreaking and illuminating. In Tommy's world, if you missed people, you invited them over. If you were lonely, you brought your family to where you were. "Would you like to see the building, Tommy? When you're feeling better, would you like to come visit it?" His eyes widened. "Really? I could really see it? Could I go to the top floor? Could I look out the windows at everything?" "You could see everything, and maybe, if you want, you could help me figure out how to make it feel less lonely up there." Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, but I could see him watching both of us carefully, as if trying to gauge whether this interaction was genuine or performative. When Tommy started asking detailed questions about the building's construction and how many people worked there, Marcus finally spoke up. "Tommy, why don't you show Aunt Ellie your business plan?" "You have a business plan?" I asked, genuinely surprised. Tommy's excitement became almost manic. He reached into his folder again and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in his careful 8-year-old handwriting and elaborate illustrations. "It's for my company. I'm going to make video games that help kids who are sick feel better, games that make you forget about being in the hospital." He spread the papers out on his bed tray with obvious pride. "See, this one would be about a kid who gets superpowers from taking medicine, and this one would be about exploring space while you're stuck in bed." I studied his drawings and descriptions with genuine amazement. Despite his illness, despite spending months in and out of hospitals, Tommy had channeled his experience into something creative and altruistic. He wanted to help other children going through what he was going through. "This is incredible, Tommy. These are really good ideas. Dad helped me write some of the words, but the ideas are all mine. When I get better, I'm going to learn how to make real video games. Maybe you could teach me about running a business?" The hope in his voice, the assumption that he would get better and pursue his dreams, was simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. Here was a child facing a life-threatening illness with more optimism and forward thinking than most adults managed during ordinary challenges. "I would love to teach you about business, but I think you might end up teaching me a few things too." "Like what?" I looked at his drawings, at his excited face, at the medical equipment surrounding him that he seemed to barely notice. "Like how to stay focused on what really matters, even when everything around you is scary and uncertain." Tommy smiled at this, clearly pleased with the idea that he might have something valuable to offer his successful aunt. As he launched into more detailed explanations of his video game concepts, I found myself thinking about the irony of the situation. I'd spent years accumulating knowledge about markets and strategies and competitive advantages, but an 8-year-old with cancer was teaching me lessons about courage and purpose that no business school had ever covered. Our conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. A woman in her early 40s, wearing a white coat, entered, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of warm smile that medical professionals develop after years of working with children. "Tommy, how are we feeling today?" she asked, then turned to me. "You must be Elise. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Tommy's oncologist. Marcus mentioned you might be joining us for treatment discussions." I stood to shake her hand, immediately impressed by her direct but compassionate demeanor. "Thank you for taking such good care of my nephew, Dr. Chen. I know Marcus has mentioned how wonderful you've been." "Tommy makes it easy. He's one of our most determined patients." She pulled up a chair, creating a small circle with Marcus, Tommy, and myself. I understand you'd like to know more about his treatment plan? For the next 30 minutes, Dr. Chen walked us through Tommy's diagnosis, current treatment protocol, and prognosis, with the kind of thorough explanation that made it clear why Marcus trusted her so completely. She used medical terms when necessary but translated everything into language that even Tommy could understand, occasionally asking him questions to make sure he felt included in discussions about his own care. The news was cautiously optimistic. Tommy's leukemia had been caught relatively early and he was responding well to the initial rounds of chemotherapy. However, the experimental treatment that offered the best long-term prognosis was indeed expensive and not covered by insurance. The clinical trial Tommy qualifies for has shown remarkable results in children with his specific genetic markers, Dr. Chen explained. But even with the trial covering the medication costs, there are associated expenses that can be overwhelming for families. What kind of expenses are we talking about? I asked. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ellis, we don't need to. Yes, we do, I said firmly. Dr. Chen, please continue. Extended stays near the treatment facility, specialized nutrition support, frequent monitoring that requires additional lab work, potential complications that might require immediate intervention. Dr. Chen consulted her tablet. For most families, we're looking at approximately $60,000 to $80,000 in out-of-pocket expenses over the 6-month treatment period. The number hit Marcus visibly. Even though he'd clearly known the general cost, hearing it stated so precisely in front of Tommy and me seemed to drain the color from his face. But here's the important thing, Dr. Chen continued, looking directly at Tommy. This treatment has an 87% success rate for children in your age group with your specific diagnosis. Those are very good odds, Tommy. So I'm probably going to get better? Tommy asked with the kind of direct honesty that adults often avoided in medical conversations. I think you have an excellent chance of making a full recovery, yes. But it's going to require patience and continuing to be as brave as you've been so far. After Dr. Chen left, promising to have her financial coordinator provide detailed cost breakdowns, the room fell quiet except for the soft beeping of Tommy's monitoring equipment. Marcus stared at his hands, clearly processing the financial implications of what we'd just learned. Dad, are you worried about the money? Tommy asked with startling perceptiveness. A little bit, buddy, but we'll figure it out, we always do. Aunt Ellie has lots of money, she could help us, right? Tommy looked between his father and me with the guileless confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned that family relationships could be complicated by pride and resentment. Tommy, it's not that simple, Marcus began. Actually, it is that simple, I interrupted. Dr. Chen is going to send me all the financial information, and I'm going to take care of everything. The experimental treatment, the associated costs, everything. Ellis, we can't accept. You're not accepting charity, Marcus. You're letting Tommy's aunt help pay for his medical care. There's a difference. I turned to Tommy, who was watching our exchange with intense interest. Tommy, do you remember what I told you about feeling lonely in my tall building? He nodded. Well, one of the things that makes people less lonely is being able to help the people they love when those people need help. Paying for your treatment isn't just about making you better, though that's the most important part. It's also about making me feel like I'm actually part of this family again. Tommy considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important topics. So if Dad lets you help, it makes you happy too? It makes me very happy. Then Dad should definitely let you help. I want everyone to be happy. Marcus looked at his son, then at me, clearly struggling with emotions he couldn't easily name. It's so much money, Elise. I don't know how I'd ever pay you back. You don't pay me back. That's not how family works. I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. This is my personal banker's direct number. I'm going to call her today and set up an account specifically for Tommy's medical expenses. Dr. Chen's office can send all bills directly to the bank. You're really going to do this? I'm really going to do this. And Marcus, there's something else I want to discuss with you. He looked wary again, as if waiting for conditions or strings to be attached to my offer. I want you and Tommy to move into the residential unit in my building. Not temporarily, not just during treatment. Permanently. Ellis, hear me out. Tommy's going to need ongoing monitoring even after his treatment ends. Having him close to the hospital makes sense medically. And having you both close to me makes sense personally. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I've spent the last decade building something impressive, but I built it in isolation. I want to learn how to share success instead of just achieving it. Tommy's eyes had grown wide during this conversation. We could live in your building, the really tall one? You could live in your building, I corrected. It would be your home too. Could I see the whole city from my bedroom window? You could see everything, Tommy. The mountains, the water, the Space Needle, everything. The boy's excitement was infectious, but I could see Marcus still processing the magnitude of what I was offering. Free medical care was one thing. It directly addressed an immediate crisis. But free housing, permanent residence in one of Seattle's most expensive buildings, was something else entirely. There's a reason you're doing this, Marcus said finally. It's not just about Tommy, is it? He was right, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. No, it's not just about Tommy. It's about me wanting to be the kind of person who deserves to have family close by. It's about realizing that all the success in the world means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. And if this doesn't work out? If living together creates more problems than it solves? I thought about his question seriously. Moving Marcus and Tommy into my building would fundamentally change my carefully controlled life. There would be noise and interruptions and the constant awareness that other people's needs might take priority over my work schedule. Then we'll figure it out as we go. But Marcus, I can't keep living the way I have been. I can't keep choosing work over family and then wondering why I feel empty despite all my achievements. I looked at Tommy, who was listening to every word with rapt attention. This little boy is fighting cancer and dreaming about building video games to help other sick kids. He's 8 years old and he already understands something about purpose that it took me 15 years to figure out. What's that? Marcus asked. That success without connection is just expensive loneliness. That achievement without love is just accumulation. I reached over and took Tommy's small hand in mine. I want to learn how to build something that matters beyond quarterly reports and profit margins. I want to learn how to be an aunt who shows up, not just one who sends checks. Tommy squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I think you're going to be really good at it, Aunt Ellie, and maybe I can help you make your building feel less lonely. I think you already have, Tommy. For the first time since Marcus had walked into my office, I felt like we were moving towards something positive, instead of just away from something broken. The anger and resentment that had characterized our relationship for years wasn't gone, but it was being replaced by something more constructive. A shared commitment to Tommy's well-being, and a tentative willingness to rebuild our connection as adults. There's one more thing, I said to Marcus. I want to establish a college fund for Tommy, and I want to set up a foundation to help other families dealing with childhood cancer. Tommy's idea about video games for sick kids. I want to help him make that real when he's ready. Aunt Ellie, you don't have to, Tommy started. I want to, because you've already taught me something important about business that I'd forgotten. What? That the best businesses solve problems that matter. And helping sick kids feel better, that's a problem that definitely matters. As visiting hours came to an end, I found myself reluctant to leave. For the first time in years, I was in a place where money and success mattered less than simply being present for someone I loved. Tommy's room, with its medical equipment and cheerful decorations, felt more real than my corner office, with its expensive furniture and impressive awards. When can you come back? Tommy asked as I was gathering my things. How about tomorrow? Same time? Will you bring pictures of your building? I want to see what my new home is going to look like. I'll bring pictures, and maybe we can start planning how to decorate your new room. As Marcus and I walked back to the parking garage, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, as we reached his truck, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know this changes everything, right? If you really mean what you said there, about the treatment, the apartment, all of it. There's no going back to the way things were. Good, I said without hesitation. The way things were wasn't working for anyone. 3 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of the Whitmore Financial Tower watching Marcus and Tommy walk through the entrance for their first day as residents. Tommy moved slowly, still recovering from his latest round of treatment, but his eyes were bright with wonder as he took in the marble floors and soaring ceiling that had impressed me the first time I'd walked through these doors as the building's new owner. "It's even bigger than in the pictures," Tommy said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "How many people work here, Aunt Ellie?" "About 400, across all 23 floors. But the residential floors are separate. Those are just for people who live here." Marcus looked around with an expression I was still learning to read. Over the past 3 weeks, as we'd navigated medical appointments and apartment preparations, his defensive anger had gradually been replaced by something more complex. Gratitude mixed with lingering uncertainty about whether this new arrangement could really work. "The moving truck should be here with your things from Cedar Falls tomorrow," I told him as we walked toward the residential elevators. "And Mom is driving up next weekend to see Tommy and help you get settled." The mention of our mother brought a smile to Marcus's face. In the weeks since Tommy's diagnosis had brought our family crisis into the open, Mom had become the bridge between Marcus and me, helping us navigate the practical and emotional challenges of rebuilding our relationship. Her relief at no longer carrying the financial burden alone had been evident in every phone call. The elevator ride to the 21st floor was quiet except for Tommy's excited commentary about the view through the glass walls. When the doors opened onto the residential hallway, he immediately ran to the large windows at the end of the corridor. "I can see the whole city. Dad, look! Is that the Space Needle? It looks so small from up here." The apartment I'd prepared for them was a 3-bedroom unit with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stretched from Elliott Bay to the Cascade Mountains. I'd had it professionally decorated, but in consultation with Tommy, who'd insisted on input about his room's color scheme and furniture arrangement. "This is really going to be our home?" Tommy asked, as we walked through the living room toward his bedroom. "This is really going to be your home?" He pushed open the door to his room and gasped. The walls were painted in the deep blue he'd requested, with glow-in-the-dark stars arranged in actual constellation patterns across the ceiling. A high-quality telescope sat by the window, and the desk was equipped with a new computer suitable for both homework and his growing interest in game design. "It's perfect," he said quietly, then ran to hug me with more energy than I'd seen from him since we'd met. "Thank you, Aunt Ellie. Thank you for making everything better." As Tommy explored his new room, Marcus and I stood in the living room, looking out at the city spread below us. The view from here was different from my office. Softer somehow, more residential, less focused on conquest, and more on simply being present in a beautiful place. "I keep waiting for the catch," Marcus said quietly, "for the conditions you haven't mentioned yet, or the expectations that come with all this generosity." "There's no catch, Marcus. Just the expectation that you'll let me be part of Tommy's life, and part of your life too." "And your work? Your company? How are you managing to step back from all that without everything falling apart?" It was a fair question. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd made more changes to my professional life than I had in the previous 5 years combined. I'd promoted Rebecca to Chief Operations Officer, giving her authority over day-to-day management decisions. I'd restructured my schedule to include non-negotiable family time. I'd turned down 2 potentially lucrative deals because they would have required extensive travel during Tommy's treatment period. "I discovered something interesting," I said. "When you hire good people and actually trust them to do their jobs, they rise to the occasion. My company is running more efficiently now than it ever did when I was micromanaging every decision." "And you don't miss it? Total control? Being indispensable?" I thought about the question seriously. There were moments when I felt the familiar anxiety about not being directly involved in every choice, every meeting, every strategic decision. But those moments were increasingly overshadowed by the satisfaction of watching Tommy's health improve, of rebuilding my relationship with Marcus, of finally feeling connected to something beyond quarterly earnings. "I miss the illusion of control," I admitted, "but I don't miss the isolation that came with it." A loud crash from Tommy's room interrupted our conversation, followed immediately by his voice calling out, "I'm okay, I just knocked over some books." Marcus smiled at the sound, the normal, everyday noise of a child exploring his space. He's getting stronger every day. Dr. Chen says his latest blood work is the best it's been since diagnosis. Is the experimental treatment working? Better than they hoped. She thinks he'll be able to start a modified school schedule next month, maybe even join some after-school activities by the new year. The idea of Tommy returning to normal childhood activities, school, friends, sports, ordinary childhood concerns, felt like a small miracle. When I'd first seen him in that hospital bed 3 weeks ago, it had been hard to imagine him healthy and active again. Speaking of school, I said, I've been thinking about something. There's a STEM academy not far from here that has an excellent program for kids interested in technology and entrepreneurship. They even have partnerships with local game development companies. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Are you already planning Tommy's educational future? I'm planning to give him options, but only if you think it's a good idea. Before Marcus could respond, Tommy appeared in the living room doorway, holding a small wrapped package. I have something for you, Aunt Ellie. Dad helped me pick it out, but it was my idea. I unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small framed photograph. It was the picture Tommy had drawn of me standing on top of my building like a superhero, but he'd added new details. Now the stick figure had other stick figures standing beside her on the roof, clearly representing Marcus, Tommy, and what I assumed was our mother. I drew us all together in your building, Tommy explained, because now you won't be lonely up there anymore. The simple drawing represented everything I'd been trying to achieve over the past 3 weeks. The transformation from isolated success to shared meaning, from individual achievement to family connection. It's perfect, Tommy. I'm going to put it in my office so I can see it every day. And we can have that roof party I talked about. When will I'm all better? We can definitely have that roof party. As evening approached and we ordered dinner from one of the building's preferred restaurants, I found myself observing the ordinary domestic scene with amazement. Tommy doing homework at the kitchen table while asking questions about business concepts he'd heard on the news. Marcus cooks pasta while telling stories about their life in Cedar Falls. The comfortable chaos of family life unfolding in the space I'd designed for solitary luxury. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails about tomorrow's meetings, updates on ongoing projects, the constant stream of business communications that had once felt urgent and essential. But for the first time in my professional life, I let them wait. Whatever needed my attention could wait until tomorrow. Tonight was for being present with the people who mattered most. Aunt Ellie, Tommy said suddenly, looking up from his homework, do you think when I'm grown up and have my own video game company, we could have our offices in the same building? Like business partners? I think that sounds like an excellent plan, Tommy. And maybe Dad could work there too? He's really good at fixing things, and companies always need people who can fix things. I looked at Marcus, who was listening to his son's career planning with obvious amusement and pride. What do you think, Marcus? Interested in a career change? Ask me again when Tommy's CEO of his gaming empire. I might be ready for something new by then. Later that evening, after Tommy had gone to bed and Marcus had settled in to watch a movie, I stood alone on the apartment's balcony, looking out at the city lights. The view was familiar. I'd seen Seattle from this height thousands of times from my office windows. But tonight it looked different. Instead of a territory to be conquered, or a market to be dominated, it looked like a community to be part of. A place where families lived and worked and built their futures together. My phone rang. Rebecca, probably calling about tomorrow's board meeting or some client emergency that needed immediate attention. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to answer, to dive back into the constant stream of business demands that had defined my life for so long. Instead, I turned the phone to silent and went back inside. Whatever it was could wait until morning. Tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, not in a corner office overlooking the city, but in a home filled with the people I loved, finally understanding that the greatest success was not what you accomplished alone, but what you shared with others. As I checked on Tommy one last time before bed, I found him standing at his bedroom window, looking out at the lights below. It's beautiful up here, he said softly. Thank you for sharing it with us, Aunt Ellie. Thank you for helping me understand what it was for, Tommy. 3 months later, when Marcus called security to escort someone from the building, it wasn't because the family didn't belong there. It was because a former business associate of mine had shown up demanding immediate attention, refusing to accept that my priorities had fundamentally changed. As the security team politely but firmly escorted him to the exit, I realized that I'd finally learned the difference between being important and being valued, between commanding a building and creating a home. The brother who had once accused me of not belonging with people like us now understood that success meant nothing without people to share it with. And the building that had once been a monument to individual achievement had become something far more meaningful, a place where family gathered, where dreams were nurtured, and where a young boy recovering from cancer could look out at the world and imagine all the ways he might make it better. In the end, Marcus had been right about one thing. I didn't belong in that lonely tower I'd built. I belonged here, with them, in a home we'd created together from the pieces of what we'd almost lost. The irony wasn't lost on me that the building I'd purchased as a symbol of individual triumph had become the foundation for something far more valuable, a place where healing happened, where relationships were rebuilt, and where a family learned to be whole again. Tommy's recovery became the catalyst for changes that rippled through every aspect of my life. Within 6 months, he was not only cancer-free, but had started attending the STEM academy I'd mentioned. His enthusiasm for learning was infectious, and he'd begun developing actual prototypes of his therapeutic video games, with the help of a mentor I'd connected him with at a local game development studio. "Look at this, Aunt Ellie," he'd say almost daily, rushing into my office after school with new sketches and ideas. "I figured out how to make the healing potion minigame work with real medication reminders." His presence in the building had an unexpected effect on my employees as well. The executive floors, once sterile and focused solely on profit margins, began to feel more human. Tommy would sometimes do his homework in the conference room adjacent to my office, and senior staff members would stop by to check on his latest projects. The sight of a young boy working on ideas to help other sick children served as a daily reminder of what business could accomplish beyond financial returns. Marcus, meanwhile, had surprised everyone, including himself, by discovering a talent for facilities management. What had started as him helping the building's maintenance team fix a few problems had evolved into a formal consulting role. His practical skills and attention to detail made him invaluable for identifying inefficiencies and safety concerns that the previous management company had overlooked. "You know what's funny?" he told me one evening as we sat in their apartment, watching Tommy practice a presentation for his school's entrepreneurship fair. "I spent years resenting your success, thinking it made you different from us. But working here, seeing what you've actually built, I understand now that it was never about the money." What was it about? Creating something that mattered. Solving problems. Building something bigger than yourself. He gestured toward Tommy, who was animatedly explaining his latest game concept to his reflection in the window. "You did the same thing I did when Tommy got sick. You found a problem that needed solving and you threw everything you had at fixing it. The only difference was the scale." The realization that Marcus finally understood my motivations, that he saw my business achievements as an extension of the same drive that made him fight for his son's life, felt like the final piece of our reconciliation falling into place. Our mother's visits became monthly traditions, with her taking the train up from Cedar Falls to spend long weekends with us. She'd adapted to city life with surprising ease, often spending her days volunteering at the hospital's family support center while Tommy was at school and Marcus was working. "I never thought I'd see the day when my children were living in the same building again," she told me during one of these visits, as we watched Tommy and Marcus setting up a telescope on the apartment's balcony. "When you moved to Seattle, I worried we'd lost you to this city. Now I think maybe this city has gained our whole family." The foundation I'd established in Tommy's honor had grown beyond my initial expectations. What started as a fund to help families with childhood cancer expenses had expanded into a comprehensive support system that included housing assistance, educational resources, and funding for innovative research projects. Tommy had become something of a spokesperson for the foundation, speaking at fundraising events with a poise that amazed everyone who met him. "People think kids can't handle talking about serious stuff like cancer," he told me after his first public speaking engagement. "But we're the ones who know what it's really like. Adults try to protect us from the scary parts. But we're already living the scary parts. We might as well help other kids get through them too. His maturity and insight continued to astound me. At 11 years old, he was already demonstrating leadership qualities that many adults never developed. The video game company he'd started as a child's dream was becoming a legitimate business plan, with several major gaming companies expressing interest in funding his therapeutic games concept when he was old enough to launch it officially. The changes in my own life were perhaps the most dramatic. The woman who had once worked 16-hour days and measured success in quarterly revenue reports now kept family dinner as a sacred commitment. Board meetings were scheduled around Tommy's school events, business trips were planned to accommodate his treatment follow-ups and Marcus's schedule. My executive team had not only adapted to these changes but had begun implementing similar family-friendly policies throughout the company. Employee satisfaction surveys showed the highest ratings in the company's history, and productivity had actually increased despite my reduced direct involvement in day-to-day operations. You know what I've learned? I told Rebecca during one of our weekly strategy meetings. The more you trust competent people to do their jobs, the better everything works. All those years I spent thinking I was indispensable were really just years I spent limiting everyone else's potential. The building itself had been transformed as well. The ground floor now included a family resource center that provided support services for employees with children facing medical challenges. The top floor, which had once housed only my penthouse office, had been converted into a community space where residents could gather for events and celebrations. Tommy's idea for the roof party had evolved into monthly gatherings for all building residents and employees. These events had become legendary in Seattle's business community, not for their exclusivity, but for their inclusivity. CEOs mingled with maintenance staff, children played games, while adults discussed everything from market trends to Little League schedules. "This is what I imagined when I drew that first picture of us all on the roof," Tommy told me during one of these gatherings, as we stood watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Everyone together, everyone happy, everyone belonging. The word belonging had taken on new meaning for our family. It was no longer about excluding others or proving worthiness through achievement. It was about creating spaces where people could be authentic, where success was measured not just in financial terms but in the quality of relationships and the positive impact on others' lives. When journalists interviewed me now about my business philosophy, I often spoke about the lesson Tommy had taught me through his illness. That true strength wasn't about individual resilience, but about the courage to accept help and the wisdom to offer it to others. My nephew facing cancer with optimism and determination taught me more about leadership than any business school ever did, I would tell them. He showed me that the most successful enterprises are those that lift up everyone involved, not just the person at the top. The annual charity gala for our foundation had become one of Seattle's premier social events, but not because of its glamour. It was known for its heart, for the stories shared by families who had been helped, for the genuine connections made between donors and recipients. Tommy always spoke at these events, and his speeches never failed to move the audience to both tears and action. As I write this now, 3 years after that confrontational afternoon when Marcus walked into my office, I'm sitting in Tommy's room while he recovers from a minor surgery. Nothing cancer-related, just the routine appendectomy that sent us all into protective overdrive, until the doctors assured us it was completely unrelated to his previous illness. He's asleep now, peaceful and healthy, surrounded by the awards from school science fairs, prototypes of his games, and photos from our family adventures. The shoebox of childhood mementos he used to keep under his bed has been replaced by a filing cabinet where he organizes his business plans and research notes. Marcus is in the kitchen making his famous post-surgery chicken soup, the recipe our grandmother used to make when we were sick. The sounds of normal family life, television in the background, the gentle clatter of cooking, the hum of the building's systems, create a symphony of belonging that I never knew I was missing during all those years of solitary success. Tomorrow, Tommy will be back to his usual energetic self, probably trying to convince his doctors to let him present his latest game concept to their pediatric patients. Marcus will return to his duties managing building operations, a job that has evolved into overseeing similar programs at 3 other properties in the city. And I'll go back to running my company, but with the knowledge that my real success is measured not in the building I own, but in the home we've created within it. The security cameras that once monitored my building for threats now capture Tommy's laughter echoing through the hallways, Marcus's easy conversations with residents and staff, and the countless small moments that make up a life lived in connection with others. Sometimes I think about that afternoon when Marcus accused me of not belonging with people like us. He was right, in a way. I didn't belong in the isolated tower I had built around my success. But I've learned that belonging isn't about returning to where you came from. It's about creating a place where everyone you love can thrive together. The building still touches the clouds, just as Tommy imagined in his childhood drawings. But now, instead of being a lonely monument to individual achievement, it's a beacon of what's possible when success is shared, when families heal together, and when the highest floors are filled not with expensive isolation, but with love, laughter, and the sound of a young boy planning to change the world, one therapeutic video game at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.